Next Sunday, you may see, if you looked carefully at the worship schedule coming up in your bulletin, you'll see that next Sunday is actually a longer special choral presentation to be given by the choir as part of our Sunday service. And so that beautiful piece and some others like it is something we can look forward to enjoying next Sunday, and something the choir has been working very hard on for the last few weeks. I'd like to begin my reflection today by reading to you a short story called Colin's Christmas Candle by author Barbara Raftery. Colin walked slowly home from school, scuffing his feet as he crossed the hills of that little Irish fishing village. It did not seem like Christmas Eve. Perhaps this was because it had not yet snowed. But Colin knew there was another reason why it did not seem like Christmas, a reason he did not dare even whisper in his heart. He looked across the valley toward the lead-colored sea. There was not a speck of a ship on the horizon, and there had been none for 7 days now. And 7 days ago, his father's fishing schooner had been due home. "I'll bring you that puppy we've been talking about," Colin's father had said to him the morning he left. "You'll have it the week before Christmas, to be sure." But now it was already Christmas Eve, and Colin looked toward the lighthouse high on the hill. 7 days ago, a north gale had short-circuited the lighthouse wires and had snuffed out its great light. For 7 days now, there had been no light to guide a schooner home. Colin pushed open the door of his mother's cottage, and he heard her moving around in the kitchen. "We'll need more wood for the fire, Colin," she called as she came into the front room. "It's nearly burned itself out, and it's nigh time to light the candle for the Christ child." "I'm not caring much about lighting a candle, Mother," said Colin. "I know, I'm not caring much either," replied his mother, "but everyone in our village lights a candle on Christmas Eve. Even when there's sadness in the house, you must light the candle. 'Tis a symbol that your house and your heart are open to poor strangers. Come now, I've 2 candles, one for each of us. If you gather some wood, we'll be ready for supper soon." Colin went outside and hitched a basket to the donkey's back. He led the animal up the hill away so that he could gather some wood for the fire. "I'm not caring about lighting a candle," he said as he glanced toward the lighthouse, "when there's not so much as a beam of light to guide a schooner home." His donkey shook its head and neighed sadly, almost as if it understood. While he was staring at the lighthouse, Colin had an idea. It hit him like a gust of wind, touching from the top of him and spreading down until his whole spine tingled. He turned on his heels and started running up that long hill. When he came to the lighthouse, he pounded on the door. Mr. Duffy, the lighthouse keeper, padded across the room inside and opened the door just a crack. "What's gotten into you, young fella? Startling an old man like me, and on a blustery Christmas Eve, too." "Mr. Duffy," gasped Colin, "how did you light the lighthouse? Could you do it again?" "Oh, the electric batteries are blown, my boy. They're dead as can be. And they are special batteries that are not to be bought anywhere. Believe me, I've tried. So we just have to wait for the lighthouse tender whenever he arrives." "No," said Colin. "I mean, how did you light the lighthouse before there were such things as batteries?" "Why, by the oil lamp that's buried in the cellar," answered Mr. Duffy. "Now, what wild idea have ye in mind? There's no oil kept here any more." Then he looked at Colin and lowered his voice. "Ah, 'tis your father you're thinking of, isn't it? He's one of those lost on the schooner." "Would kerosene light the lamp?" asked Colin. "Well, I suppose," mused Mr. Duffy. "Kerosene was used at many lighthouses after they stopped using oil and before batteries came along, but Don't be going to get any crazy ideas in your head, lad. I'd like to see anyone find a quart of oil or kerosene in this village. Never mind enough to... But Colin was gone before Mr. Duffy could finish his sentence. Down the hill he ran as quickly as he could back to his cottage. Quickly he gathered 4 pails from the kitchen and darted for the door. His mother ran after him. "Colin, it's time to light the... Colin!" But the boy was gone. Colin knew that a lit candle in any village home on Christmas Eve meant that any stranger coming to the door would be welcomed and given whatever he or she asked. It was 5 o'clock now, and he could see candles beginning to glow in every home in the village. He didn't stop running until he came to the first house. "Could you spare me half a cup of kerosene?" he asked. At the next, "Have you any kerosene in your cellar?" Colin went to every home where a candle shone in the window. In 1 hour, he had filled 2 small pails. Slowly and painfully, he carted them, one by one, very carefully, up to the lighthouse door. He knocked. Mr. Duffy appeared and stared. "What manner of miracle is this?" he asked. "Well, this isn't enough to keep that big lamp burning for the night, I can promise you." "Don't worry," shouted Colin, "I'll get more yet," as he was already running back down the hill. It's early still. After 2 more long hours, Colin had gathered more pails of kerosene. When he was halfway up the hill for the second time, he saw the tower suddenly flicker and quiver with light. Suddenly, a great beam spread out above the village and stretched toward the dark heart of the sea. Mr. Duffy had lighted the lamp. When Colin reached home, it was very, very late. His mother jumped from her seat near the fire. "Colin, where have you been? You've had no supper nor lighted your candle." "Oh, I've lighted a candle, Mother, and a big one, but it's a secret." After that, Colin ate his supper and went quietly to bed. All night he dreamt of candles, of fishing schooners, and kegs of kerosene. Then he was awakened by a great shouting. "The ship has come in! The ship has come in!" It seemed as if 100 voices were spinning in his head. "'Twas the light, they say, the light that Mr. Duffy lighted. The ship was but 10 miles out all week after the storm, just drifting in the darkness by night and the fog by day, not sure of its location." Colin opened his eyes. He saw that dawn was breaking and that his mother was standing at the door. People were milling outside their quaint little seaside home. He jumped from his bed and pulled on his clothes. He ran to the door and looked toward the harbor. It was true. The schooner with its rigging standing out as black as coal against the gray of the sea. Colin darted across the yard and raced for the harbor. He felt a moist wind in his face, and it was beginning to snow. Oh, it was surely Christmas, all right. When I was going through for the ministry, I remember I would often get asked in my interviews a question which candidates for the ministry always get asked, and I suppose in a way it's a good question for any follower of Jesus, and the question is this: who is Jesus for you? Who is Jesus for you? It's a question which asks for perhaps an opinion or maybe even a conviction about who Jesus is. I have a friend, another minister, who likes to ask it this way: who are you to Jesus? Who are you to Jesus? You see the sides of the question flipped. It's another way of putting the question, which asks for the respondent to claim an identity in relation to Jesus. This other way of asking the question reminds us of a great truth for the Christian. Who you are depends on who Jesus is. The Gospel of John tells us that Jesus is the light of the world. He has the light that shines in the darkness, and the darkness could not overcome it. He is the light which offers illumination to everyone. And those who believe in him, writes John, have life in his light. Those who believe in him are illuminated. His light is the truth, the truth which tells us things we would not know about our lives and about the world. And so we can see our paths and our surroundings as we could not without him. His light banishes fear. Because of his life and teaching and his death and resurrection, we do not need to be afraid of some of the things that we might otherwise be afraid of. And like a child's bedroom nightlight, his light banishes fear. I think of that short story I just read, and what darkness the darkened lighthouse beam meant for the people of that little fishing village, and even more for those who were stranded at sea in the schooner without a light to guide them home. When that light was lit, it was for them, in that moment, kind of salvation. John's gospel tells us that Jesus is God's Son, God's only begotten, and that those who believe in him are loved into God's family. Those who believe in him become children of God. Not, says John, because of their own wills, not because of something their parents have done, but because of God's will. God who sent Jesus, the Son, to love each and every one of us into God's family. We think of that great bond in the story between Colin and his father, Lost and Sea. And we think of how painful it was for them to be separated, and how wonderful it was for them to be reunited. The love of God the Father for God the Son, Jesus, is perfect. It is faithful. It is enduring. And those of us who believe in Jesus are loved into that family of God, loved literally into God's own love. The Gospel of John tells us that Jesus is the Lord of creation, and that those who believe in him are called to be his servants. John the Baptist, or John the Baptizer, came to the wilderness around the Jordan River and called out the people from the countryside and the towns and the cities to be baptized in the Jordan. And the religious leaders came out from Jerusalem and they asked, "Who are you? What are you doing?" And John answered, saying, just like the prophet Isaiah said, "I am the voice of one crying in the wilderness, prepare the way of the Lord." All of us who are believers in or followers of Jesus are called to be his servants, called to prepare his way in our own way. Think, after all, of how that lighthouse light was lit. It took the imagination and persistence of young Colin. It took the open-mindedness of the lighthouse keeper not to dismiss the boy's idea. Perhaps most of all, it took the willingness to share and the love of all those villagers who had lit a candle in their window, a candle to mark the birth of the Christ child, and to show their willingness to respond by welcoming the stranger. There's an American playwright named Joan Bigwood, and she has written that all of us have a prophetic ministry like John's. And whether our own prophetic ministry be local or global or even personal, if all of us could join our voices together, we would have not a feeble cry, but a mighty chorus of praise. And therefore, what we need is imagination and faith. Who are you to Jesus? It's a way of putting our relationship to Jesus as something which defines a relationship. I would like to put it even a different way. Who does Jesus say that you are? The New Testament and the Christian faith do not ask us to speculate or to come up with great, brilliant, or creative ideas on our own, but to hear the good news. Who does Jesus say that you are? The great English theologian N.T. Wright has said, Jesus didn't come to help me find out who I really am. He came to tell me who he knows I am. Jesus is the light of the world. He says, if you believe in him, you have life in his light. Jesus is God's Son, the only begotten. He says, if you believe in him, you are loved into God's family. Jesus is the Lord of creation. He says, if you believe in him, you are called to be his servants. And that God's work in the world is being done through me and through you. Amen.